Hashtag Curfew for Men has been trending on Twitter for the last couple of days, in response primarily to the alleged murder of Sarah Everard by an off-duty police officer and an unnamed female accomplice. British MP Jess Phillips, notable feminist activist, decided to make a statement whereby she reads the list of all the women killed by men in the past 12 months.
Since last year on this day, these are the women killed in the UK, where a man has been convicted or charged as the primary perpetrator in the case.
Jess and other activists are not above using such blunt measures to, quote-unquote, raise awareness of what they perceive to be a societal issue, particularly ones that they believe government policy can solve. However, on closer inspection, as with most things, the data is much more controversial than activists for extreme measures would have you believe. Irrespective of this, several politicians, notably the First Minister of Wales, Mark Drakeford, is reportedly taking the idea of a temporary curfew for men somewhat seriously. Some have tried to claim that women already exist under curfew conditions, particularly if wanting to travel after dark, and they will lambast critics of the hashtag as failing to understand this point. The hashtag is primarily being used by both abused and activist women, as well as male allies, to promote the physical policy and to share abuse stories, as well as highly subjective surveys such as this one, that alleges that 97% of 1,000 respondents suffered some form of sexual harassment in their lives. This taking no account of any kind of sampling bias or the small amount of participants. So, let's boil down the meat of the accusations we are being presented with. Firstly, women are being murdered in an epidemic of male violence. Secondly, men commit the vast majority of murders. Thirdly, this is because of the inaction of men to defend women and to stop their peers committing murders. Also because there is something inherent in men that makes them murderers, or at least potential murderers. Finally, the preventative measures women currently take to protect themselves are excessive compared to what society should expect if we are functioning as a respectful and equal place to live. Thus, a man curfew is required. Let's break down the statistics on murder then, in the UK. According to the ONS, there are on average around 600 to 700 murders in the UK every year. Per capita, this equates to around 1 in 85,500. Over time, we can see here that this rate is increasing, with some notable peaks which occur, coinciding with deaths such as the Grays lorry incident, where 39 people died in an event relating to human trafficking, terrorism such as the Manchester bombings, and the catching of serial killers such as Dr. Harold Shipman. Since the 1960s, the rate per capita has increased from about 6 murders per million to just under 12 per million in 2020. This doubling is worrisome, but where is it concentrated? A quick caveat as well, technology has markedly improved since the 60s, and one would hope policing has improved as well comparatively. This may simply result in a larger number of murders being detected in 2021 that would have gone undiscovered in the 60s. The rise of CCTV comes to mind. In the 60s, though, we were more equal if you consider that a virtue. The rate of male and female victims was roughly 50-50. However, as female rates have remained fairly static, I'm sure you can see where I'm going with this, the distribution now is roughly 75-25 slanted, with men being 75% of murder victims. And you can see that this is consistent across the past 20 years, remembering of course the spike in 2003 relates to the outlier of Harold Shipman. This would seem to indicate, suppositionally, that men compared to women do not take enough precautions, whereas women appear to have protective factors which may be keeping them safe from murderers in general. When accounting for absolute risk as well, the odds of being murdered, irrespective of context, translates in the current year to 1 in 166,666 for women, and 1 in 58,800 for men. For additional context, these numbers do not account for area lived in or the motivation of the killer. This risk is higher than, say, the number of random murders versus murders where the victims knew the perpetrator, such as spousal murder. The chances of being a Sarah Everard are more remote than being struck by lightning, which is estimated as 1 in 150,000 over the course of a lifetime in America. The UK is a fairly safe place to live. Moving on. The second claim made is that men commit the vast majority of offences. This is true. Over the past 40 years, 81% of murder suspects have been identified as men. The principal male in question is likely to be ethnically white and British from a deprived background, although around 20 to 25% of murders do appear to take place in affluent backgrounds. Whilst none of this is provably causative, intuitively it does make some sense. Men have much more access to violence as a means to an end than women. Men from deprived backgrounds have fewer alternative means available to them, making them more likely to utilise physical options. The question of means, though, does not suitably explain the difference in behaviour between men and women. Research on the dark triad, those being Machiavellianism, narcissism and psychopathy, would suggest that whilst men score higher than women in the expression of these traits, the overlap between the sexes is far more significant than the slight difference between them. Women, having less access to the means of physical violence, will utilise other strategies to damage others. Low-status women in particular, who also lack means, may be pursuing attacks based on social standing and reputation, rather than the extreme of physical violence that men may employ. Additionally, men are remarkably pliant when it comes to women, and women may be convincing men to commit violent acts on their behalf. A kind of honour-based arrangement. All of these alternative hypotheses cannot be proven with the data available. However, intuitively, I think they make some logical sense. It would need to be tested, although I fail to see how this could be done ethically, particularly as self-reports from murderers and their accomplices cannot be trusted, and subjective interpretation is just that, subjective. Men do commit the vast majority of murders. However, it is important to note that in no way can this statement be used as qualification for the assertion that men are most murderers because they are men. There are many potential confounds, and this devolves into he said, she said politicking. The third point to address is that men are responsible for the murderers of women because they are men. This is somewhat different to the previous statement, which was saying that men are murderers because they are men. This is saying that men are responsible for murderers because those murderers are men. This is obviously a farcical suggestion, particularly in a societal context based on individualism. I often read that it's not all men are murderers, it's too many men though, and all men are potential murderers. In an age with firearms, easily accessible knives and other options, poison, chemicals, etc., I could just as easily make the statement, everyone is a potential murderer, I will never feel safe again. There is always an element of risk. This is completely irrelevant to the facts. Murder is an extraordinarily rare occurrence. Random murder even more so, irrespective of sex. Murderers are a tiny minority of the population. I may as well claim that women are responsible to prevent the murder of children, given that female murderers are responsible for 70% of child murder attempts. You are extraordinarily unlikely to encounter a murderer in your lifetime. And even if so, how on earth could you convince a stranger, assuming you aren't voluntarily associating and are a friend with a potential murderer, to stop going through with a plan that you are likely not privy to? What a ludicrous expectation. Finally, we have the issue of the social female curfew, currently enforced by women on women, according to the proponents of this hashtag. The data, as I have laid out, would suggest that these behaviours may be protective, and by no means do I want to minimise that a lot of women are going to be hypersensitised to what they perceive as threat, particularly when alone or after dark. The efficacy of different measures, particularly when alone or after dark, the efficacy of different measures, such as holding keys as knuckle dusters, martial arts training, avoidance behaviours, travelling in groups, not getting too drunk on a night out, etc., cannot be proven in and of itself without extraordinarily unethical testing, as I've mentioned previously. However, it would seem that something about the behaviour of women is protecting them from male violence in a way that men are not protected. Women may, in fact, be taking excessive measures, which probably helps lower the risk and rate of female murder, but due to the sensationalisation of risk from sources such as MP Jess Phillips, has led to some unfounded paranoia as well. Men, conversely, may be so nonchalant or willing to engage in physical altercations that they take little to no precautions and, as a result, end up being murdered far more frequently. Both of these statements are predicated on a logical thought basis. They are falsifiable statements, although testing them would be unethical. Again, this does not mean women are not scared. This does not comment on general harassment. This makes no moral statement on what the right amount of murder is in a society. Obviously, one is too many, but it is a reality we have to live with. Precautions are taken on a risk versus severity basis. I would not walk around in an unfamiliar area, drunk out of my skull and alone, if it could be avoided. This sounds like victim blaming, but it isn't. No one deserves to be murdered. We all take precautions in some way, shape or form. If someone has a car crash and they die because they aren't wearing their seatbelt, we recognise that the person who crashed into the victim is in the wrong. We also recognise that the seatbelt probably would have saved the life of the victim. We don't see activists claiming that seatbelts should be removed because in an equal society there would be no need for seatbelts, as there would be no car crashes. Precautions are necessary. Women should make their own decisions about what precautions are appropriate depending on their circumstance, and recognise, with some relief, that the statistics suggest that these are probably helping, and that murder is suitably rare that they need not live in abject terror. Men should probably take more precautions. P.S. Murderers aren't likely to take a curfew all that seriously if they do indeed want to murder you. And here we come to the end. I have been Not So Obvious. Like, comment and subscribe, and good day.